She doesn't appreciate the mediocrity of it all, like she's sick and tired, and I think she feels like she can get a new lease on life, like basically. Hello and welcome to this week's read along with me. From last week, as usual, we're reading Revolutionary Road, and last week we stopped at a very important arc. So part two begins with a, like, nicely on a new month, and yeah, let's just get to reading. I'm excited to see what Frank has for this latter arc of his life, or this great intervention that he sort of has been hoping for. How do you guys like my frame and all of that? Okay, let's start. So part two starts with another chapter one. If you hear any screaming, or don't worry, everybody's fine. If you hear dogs, my neighbor's dogs is on a rampage, and yeah, just ignore all those outside noise. Let's focus on Frank. Yeah. There now began a time of such joyous derangement, of such exultant carelessness, that Frank Wheeler could never afterward remember how long it lasted. It could have been a week or 2 weeks or more before his life began to come back into focus, with its customary concern for the passage of time and its anxious need to measure and apportion it. And by then, looking back, he was unable to tell how long it had been otherwise. The only day that would always stand clear and sharp in his memory was the first one, the day after his birthday. He did sleep on the train, riding with his head falling back on the dusty plush and his times sliding from his lap. And he stood for a long time over scalding cups of coffee in the echoing tan vault of Grand Central, allowing himself to be late for work. How small and neat and comically serious the other men looked, with their grey flecked crew cuts and their button-down collars and their brisk little hurrying feet. There were endless desperate swarms of them hurrying through the station and the street. And an hour from now, they would all be still. The waiting midtown office buildings would swallow them up and contain them, so that to stand in one tower looking out across the canyon to another would be to inspect a great silent insectarium displaying hundreds of tiny pink men in white shirts, forever shifting papers and frowning into telephones, acting out their passionate little dumb show under the supreme indifference of the rolling spring crowd. Hold on. In the meantime, Frank Wheeler's coffee was delicious. His paper napkin was excellently white and dry, and the grandmotherly woman who served him was so courteous and so clearly pleased with the rhythm of her own. Oh fuck! I should have poured water. With the rhythm of her own efficiency. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Will that be all, sir? That he wanted to lean over and press a kiss into her wrinkled cheek. By the time he reached the office, he had passed into that euphoria of half-refreshed exhaustion, in which all sounds are muffled, all sights are blurred, and every task is easy. First things first, and the first thing he had to do when the elevator door slid open at the 15th floor was to walk up and deal like a man with Maureen Group. She was alone at her reception desk in a dark suit that she had probably worn because it was the most severe, least provocative thing in her wardrobe. And when she saw him coming, she looked badly flustered. But his smile was so expert, not the least bit furtive or the least bit vain, a perfectly open, friendly smile, that he could see the assurance come back into her face before he got to the desk. Had she been afraid he would think her a tramp, that he'd spend the day whispering and chuckling about her with the other men? If so, the smile told her she could relax. Had she been afraid, on the other hand, that he would try to make a big romantic thing out of it, that he'd embarrass the life out of her with messy little importunings in corners? I've got to see you. The smile told her she could stop worrying about that too. And these two possibilities for the moment were the only ones that seemed likely enough to bother with. Hi, he said kindly. You have any trouble about yesterday? With Mrs. Jorgensen, I mean. No, she didn't say anything. She seemed to be having some difficulty in meeting his eyes. She was looking mostly at the knot of his tie, standing there and smiling down at her, with the constant hum and bustle of people kneeling just out of earshot in the dry lake beyond them. He could easily have been stopping to pass the time of day or ask her about a typing job. There was nothing in his face or his stance to arouse the curiosity of onlookers. Yet, at close range, from where she sat, he knew there could be no doubt of his intimate sincerity. Look, Maureen, he began, if I thought there was anything to be gained by it for either of us, I would say let's go somewhere this afternoon and have a talk. And if you want to, if there's anything at all you want to tell me or ask me, that's what we'll do. Is there? No, except that no, there isn't really. You're right. It isn't a question of being right. I don't want you to think never mind. But listen, the important thing in a thing like this is not to have any regrets. I don't. I hope you don't. And if you do, I hope you tell me. No, she said, I don't. I'm glad. And listen, you're so Maureen. If there's ever anything I can, do for you or anything, I hope you let me know. I guess that sort of sounds crummy. All I mean is that I'd like us to be friends. All right, she said. So would I. And he walked away up the aisle of cubicles, moving slowly and confidently in a new, more mature version of the old terrifically sexy walk of Bethlehem Street. As simple as that. If he had spent days planning and rehearsing it, filling page after page of scratch paper with revised and crossed out sentences, he could never have come up with a more dignified, more satisfactory speech, and all on the spur of the moment. Was there anything in the world he couldn't do? Morning, Dad, he said to Jack Ordway. Franklin, my son, how good to see your shining morning face. But first things first. And the next thing now was his in basket. No, it was the batch of papers he had dropped on the middle of his desk yesterday. The things Maureen had pulled from the central file, which had brought up the whole disorderly problem of the branch manager in Toledo and the production control brochure. Was he going to let a thing like that harass him? Certainly not. Intra-company letter to Toledo, he said into the mouthpiece of his dictaphone, leaning back in his swivel chair and working his foot into its wooden saddle on the drawer edge. Attention, B.F. Chalmers, branch manager, subject, NAPE conference, paragraph. With regard to recent and previous correspondence, this is to advise that the matter has been very satisfactorily taken in hand. Period. Paragraph. He went that far without any idea of how the matter was going to be taken in hand, if at all. But as he sat fingering the mouthpiece, he began to get ideas, and soon he was intoning one smooth sentence after another, pausing only to smile in satisfaction. The branch manager in Toledo was turning out to be as easy to handle as Maureen Group. F.H. Wheeler, or we, wholly agreed that the existing brochure was unsuitable. Fortunately, the problem had now been solved in a way in which we were confident would meet the branch manager's approval. As the branch manager doubtless knew, the NAPE delegates would be given dozens of competitive promotion brochures, most of which were certain to end up in the wastebasket of the convention floor. The problem then was to develop something different for Knox, something that would catch the delegate's eye, that he would want to put in his pocket and take back to his hotel room. Just such a piece was now in production, designed specifically for the NAPE conference, a brief, straightforward sales message entitled, Speaking of Production Control. As the branch manager would see, this document relied on no sleek format, no fancy artwork or advertising jargon to tell the story. Crisply printed in large, easy-to-read type in black and white, it had all the immediacy of plain talk. It would give the NAPE delegate nothing more or less than what he wants, the facts. After putting a new belt in the dictaphone machine, he leaned back again and said, Copy for very type. Heading, Speaking of production control, ... paragraph. Production control is, after all, nothing more or less than the job of putting the right material in the right place at the right according to a variance schedule. Period. Paragraph. This is simple arithmetic. Period. Given all the variables, comma, a man can do it with a pencil and paper, period. But the Knox 500 electronic computer can do it dash, literally dash, thousands of times faster, period. That's why dot dot dot. Coming down for coffee, Franklin? I guess not, Jack. I better finish this thing. And he did finish it, though it took him all morning. Fingering through the papers from the central file with his free hand, lifting a sentence here and a paragraph there, he continued to recite into the dictaphone until he had explained all the advantages of using a computer to coordinate the details of factory production. It sounded very authoritative when he played it back. Once the bill of materials had been exploded, he heard his own voice saying, "The computer's next step is to scan the updated parts inventory." No one could have told that he didn't quite know what he was talking about. When the typescript came back, he would polish it up. Maybe he'd have it checked over by one of the technical men just to be safe, and then he would have it very typed and sent to Toledo in the required number of copies. For self-protection, he would send one copy to Bandy with a note saying, "Hope this is okay." Toledo wanted something short and sweet for the name thing, and with luck, he would be off the hook. In the meantime, he could safely remove all the troublesome Toledo correspondence from the stack of things he couldn't bring himself to face just now, and put it in his out basket marked file, along with all the brochure material. This made such a surprising reduction in the clutter of his desk that he was encouraged after lunch to tackle 2 or 3 other matters in the stack of things he couldn't face. One of them involved a ticklish letter explaining why we had allowed an obsolete model of adding machine demonstrator to be shipped to the Chicago Business Fair, and he made it in an airtight masterpiece of evasion. Another, a thick sheaf of letters that he had been avoiding for weeks, turned out to be much simpler than he had thought, in that it all boiled down to a decision left squarely up to him. Should solid gold tie clasp $14.49 or solid gold lapel buttons $8.98 be offered as the prizes in a quota breaking contest among the tabulating equipment salesmen of Minneapolis St. Paul? Tie clasps, and into the house basket it went. Bro, this is so boring, and this chapter, as far as I could see, is so long, and you guys just get something to drink, or maybe you get to crochet in the background as I'm reading. He was a demon of energy, and it wasn't until 4 o'clock, walking blarily into the water cooler, watch the big bubble come up, blurp, isn't that funny, that he realized why. It was because April had left a small pocket of guilt in his mind last night by saying that he had walked like a dog year after year. He had meant to point out that whatever it was he had been doing here year after year, it could hardly be called walking like a dog, but she hadn't given him a chance. And now, by trying to clear all the papers off his desk in one day, he gets he was trying to make up for having misled her. But what kind of nonsense was that? How could it possibly matter what he had been doing here year after year, or what she had thought he had been doing, or what she thought he had been doing? None of it mattered anymore. Couldn't he get that through his head? And as he stumbled back from the water cooler, wiping his cold mouth with a warm hand, he began to understand for the first time that in another few months he would leave this place forever. All of it, lights, glass partitions, chattering typewriters, the whole slow, dry agony of this place would be cut away from his life like a tumor from his brain, and good riddance. His final act of that day in the office involved no work at all and very little energy, though it did take a certain amount of courage. He opened the big bottom drawer of his desk, carefully lifted out the whole stack of real goodies. It weighed as much as a couple of telephone books, and tipped it into the waste basket. For an indeterminate number of days after that, the office all but vanished from his consciousness. He went through the motions, shuffling his papers, having conferences with Bandy, having lunch with Audrey and the others, smiling with dignity whenever he passed Boring Group in the corridors, and even stopping to chat with her now and then to show that they were friends. But the fact was that the daytime had ceased to have any meaning except as a period of rest and preparation for the evening. He never seemed to fully come awake until the moment he was swung down from the train at sunset and climbed into his station car. Then came the stimulation of drinks with April. while the children lay silenced by television, and then the pleasure of dinner, which in conversational intensity was very like the dinners they had had before they were married. But the day didn't really begin until later still, when the children were in bed with their door firmly shut for the night. Then they would take their places in the living room, April curled attractively on the sofa usually, and Frank standing with his back to the bookcase, each with a cup of black Italian coffee and a cigarette, and give way to their love affair. He would begin to pace around slowly and around the room as he talked, and she would follow him with her eyes, often with the tilt of her whole head and shoulders. From time to time, when he felt he had made a trenchant point, he would wheel and stare at her in triumph. Then to be her turn to talk while he walked and nodded, and when her turn was over, their looks would meet exultantly again. Sometimes there was a glint of humor in those embraces of the eye. I know I'm showing off, they seem to say, but so are you, and I love you. And what did it matter? The very substance of their talk, after all, the message and the rhyme of it, whatever else they might be saying, was that they were going to be new and better people from now on. April, tucked up on the sofa with her skirt arranged in a graceful well from waist to ankle, her tall neck very white in the soft light, and her face held in perfect composure, but hardly any resemblance to the stiff, humiliated actress who had stood in the curtain call, and still less to the angrily sweating wife who had hauled the lawnmower, or to the jaded matron who had endured the evening of false friendship with the Campbells, or to the embarrassingly ardent woman who had welcomed him to his birthday party. Her voice was subtle and low as in the first act of The Petrified Forest, and when she tipped back her head to laugh or leaned forward to reach out and tap ash from her cigarette, she made it a maneuver of classic beauty. Anyone could picture her conquering Europe. And Frank was modestly aware that something of the same kind of change was taking place in himself. He knew for one thing that he had developed a new way of talking, slower and more deliberate than usual, deeper in tone and more fluent. He almost never had to recourse to the stammering, apologetic little bridges, no, but I mean, I don't know, you know, that normally laced his speech, nor did his head duck and weave in a familiar nervous effort to make himself clear. Catching sight of his walking reflection in the black picture window, he had to admit that his appearance was not yet as accomplished as hers. His face was too plump and his mouth was too bland, his pants too well pressed and his shirt too fussily Madison Avenue. But sometimes late at night, when his throat had gone sore and his eyes hot from talking, when he launched his shoulders and set his jaw and pulled his necktie loose and let it hang like a rope, he could glare at the window and see the brave beginnings of a personage. It was a strange time for the children too. What exactly going to France in the fall mean? And why did their mother keep insisting it was going to be fun, as if daring them to doubt it? For that matter, why was she so funny about a lot of things? In the afternoon, she would hug them and ask them questions in a rush of ebullience that suggested Christmas Eve, and then her eyes would go out of focus during their replies, and a minute later she would be saying, yes, darling, but don't talk quite so much, okay? Give mommy a break. Nor did their father's homecoming do much to help. He might throw them high in the air and give them airplane rides around the house until they were dizzy, but only after having failed to see them all together during the disturbingly long time it took him to greet their mother at the kitchen door. And the talking at dinner, it was hopeless for either child to try and get a word in edgewise. Michael found he could jiggle in his chair, repeat baby words over and over in a shrill idiot monotone, or stuff his mouth with mashed potatoes and hang his jaws open, all without any adult reproof. Jennifer would sit very straight at the table and refuse to look at him, feeling great interest in whatever her parents were saying, though afterwards, waiting for bedtime, she would sometimes go off quietly by herself and suck her tongue. There was one consolation. They could go to sleep without any fear of being waked in an hour by the abrupt, thumping, heart-breathing, door-slamming sounds of a fight. All that apparently was a thing of the past. They could lie drowsing now under the sound of kindly voices in the living room, a sound whose intricately rhythmic rise and fall would slowly turn into the shape of their dreams. And if they came awake later to turn over and reach with their toes for new cool places in the sheets, they knew the sound would still be there. One voice very deep and the other soft and pretty, talking and talking, as substantial and soothing as the blue range of mountains seen from far away. This whole country's rotten with sentimentality, Frank said one night, turning ponderously from the window to walk the carpet. It's been spreading like a disease for years, for generations, until now everything you touch is flabby with it. Exactly, she said, enraptured with him. I mean, isn't that really what's the matter when you get right down to it? I mean, even more than the profit motive or the loss of spiritual values or the fear of the bomb or any of those things. Or maybe it's the result of those things. Maybe it's what happens when all those things start working at once without any real cultural tradition to absorb them. Anyway, whatever it's the result of, it's what's killing the United States. I mean, isn't it? This steady, insistent vulgarizing of every idea and every emotion into some kind of pre-digested intellectual baby food. This optimistic, smiling through easy way out sentimentality in everybody's view of life. Yes, she said. Yes. And I mean, is it any wonder all the men end up emasculated? Because that is what happens. That is what's reflected in all this bleating about adjustment and security and togetherness. And I mean, Christ, you see it everywhere. All this television crap where every joke is built on the premise that dad is an idiot and mother is always on to them. And these loathsome little signs people put up in their front yards. You ever notice those signs up on the hill? The signs, you mean, with the people's name in the plural, like the Donaldsons. Right, he turned and smiled down at her in triumphant congratulation for having seen exactly what he meant. Never Donaldson or John J. Donaldson or whatever the hell his name is, always the Donaldsons. You picture the whole cozy little bunch of them sitting around all snug as bunnies in their pajamas, for God's sake, toasting marshmallows. I guess the Campbells haven't put up a sign like that yet, but give them time. The rate they are going now, they will. He paused here for a deep-throated laugh. And my God, when you think how close we came to settling into that kind of existence, but we didn't, she told him. That's the important thing. Another time, quite late, he walked up close to the sofa and sat down on the edge of the coffee table facing her. You know what this is like, April, talking like this? The whole idea of taking off to Europe this way, he felt tense and keyed up. The very act of sitting on a coffee table seemed an original and wonderful thing to do. It's like coming out of a cellophane bag. It's like having been encased in some kind of cellophane for years without knowing it and suddenly breaking out. It's a little like the way I felt going up the line the first time in the war. I remember acting very grim and scared because that was the fashionable way to act, but I couldn't really put my heart into it. I mean, I was scared, of course, but that's not the point. What I really felt didn't have anything to do with being scared or not scared. I just felt this terrific sense of life. I felt full of blood. Everything looked realer and than real. The snow on the fields, the roads, the trees, the terrific blue sky, all marked up with vapor trails, everything. And all the helmets and overcoats and rifles and the way the guys were walking, I sort of loved them, even the guys I didn't like. And I remember being very conscious of the way my own body worked and the sound of the breathing in my nose. I remember we went through this shelled out town, all broken walls and rubble, and I thought it was beautiful. Hell, I was probably just as dumb and scared as anybody else, but inside, I'd never felt better. I kept thinking, this is really true. This is the truth. I felt that way once too, she said. And in the shyness of her lips, he saw that something overpoweringly tender was coming next. When he was as bashful as a schoolboy, unable to look her full in the face. The first time he made love to me. The coffee table tipped absurdly and banged straight again, rattling its cups as he moved from its edge to the edge of the sofa and took her in his arms, and the evening was over. It wasn't until a good many such evenings had passed, until the time, in fact, when he had again begun to think in terms of time passing, that the first faint discordances crept into their talk. Once he interrupted her to say, "Listen, why do we keep talking about Paris? Don't they have government agencies pretty much all over Europe? Why not Rome or Venice or some place like Greece even? I mean, let's keep an open mind. Paris isn't the only place." Of course it isn't. She was impatiently brushing a fleck of ash off her lap, but it does seem the most logical place to start, doesn't it? With the advantage of you knowing the language and everything. If he had looked at the window at that moment, he would have seen the picture of a frightened liar. The language! Had he ever really led her to believe he could speak French? Well, he said, chuckling and walking away from her. I wouldn't be too sure about that. I've probably forgotten most of what little I knew. And I mean, I never did know the language in the sense of, being able to speak it fluently or anything, just barely enough to get by. That's all we'll need. You pick it up again in no time. We both will. And besides, at least you've been there. You know how the city is laid out and what the various neighborhoods are like. That's important. And he silently assured himself that this, after all, was substantially true. He knew where most of the picture postcards landmarks were, on the strength of his several 3-day passes in the city long ago. He also knew how to go from any of those places to where the American PX and Red Cross Club had once been established, and how to go from those points to the place Pigali, and how to choose the better kind of prostitute there, and what her room would probably smell like. He knew those things, and he knew too that the best part of Paris, the part where the people really knew how to live, began around Saint-Germain-des-Prés and extended southeast, or was it southwest, as far as the Café Dome. But this latter knowledge was based more on his reading of The Sun Also Rises in high school than on his real life venturings into the district, which had mostly been lonely and footsore. He had admired the ancient delicacy of the buildings and the way the street lamps had made soft explosions of light green in the trees at night, and the way each long, bright cafe awning would prove to reveal a sea of intelligently talking faces as he passed. But the white wine gave him a headache, and the talking faces all seemed on closer inspection to belong either to intimidating men with beards or to women whose eyes could sum him up and dismiss him in less than a second. The place had filled him with a sense of wisdom hovering just out of reach, of unspeakable grace prepared and waiting just around the corner. But he had walked himself weak down his endless blue streets, and all the people who knew how to live had kept their tantalizing secrets to themselves, and time after time he had ended up drunk and puking over the tailgate of the truck that bore him jolting back into the army. Je suis, he practiced to himself while April went on talking. Tu es, nous sommes, vous êtes, ils sont. Better once we get settled, she was saying. Don't you think? You're not listening. Sure I am. No, I'm sorry, I guess I wasn't. And he sat down on the coffee table, smiling with what he hoped was a disarming candor. I was just thinking that none of this is going to be easy, taking off to a foreign country with the kids and all. I mean, we'll be running into a lot of problems we can't even begin to anticipate from this end. Well, certainly we will, she said, and certainly it's not going to be easy. Do you know anything worth doing that is? Of course not, you're right. I'm just kind of tired tonight, I guess. Would you like a drink? No thanks. He went to the kitchen and got one for himself, which brightened him, and there were no further difficulties until the next night, or the next, when she made a startling disclosure about how she had spent her day. He had assumed that she too would be lazy and absent-minded in the daytime. He had pictured her taking long baths and devoting whole hours to the bedroom mirror, trying on different dresses and new ways of fixing her hair. Perhaps leaving the mirror only to walk slightly away on the strings of imaginary violins, whirling in a dream through the sunlit house and returning to smile over her shoulder at her own flushed image, and then having to hurry to get the beds made and the rooms in order in time for his homecoming. But it turned out that on this particular day, she had driven to New York right after breakfast and had undergone an interview and filled out a lengthy job application with an overseas employment office, had gone from there to make the necessary arrangement for their passport, had obtained 3 travel brochures and the schedules of half a dozen steamship companies and airlines, and bought 2 new traveling bags, a French dictionary, a street guide to Paris, a copy of Baba the Elephant for the children, and a book called Brighter French for bright people who already knew some, and had sped home and relieved the babysitter just in time to get the dinner started and mix a pitcher full of martinis. Aren't you tired? Not really. It was sort of invigorating. Do you realize how long it's been since I spent a day in town? I was going to pop into the office at lunchtime and surprise you, but there wasn't time. What's the matter? Nothing. It just sort of throws me, that's all. The amount of stuff you can get done in one day. Pretty impressive. You're annoyed, she said, aren't you? Oh, and I don't blame you. She puckered her face into what looked distressingly like the understanding simper of the wife in a television comedy. It must seem as if I'm sort of taking over, doesn't it? Taking charge of everything. No, he protested. No, listen. Don't be silly. I'm not annoyed. It doesn't matter. It does matter, though. It does matter though. It's like when I mowed the lawn or something, I knew I should have left the passport and the travel agent for you to handle, but I was right there in the neighborhood and it seemed silly not to stop in. Oh, but I'm sorry. Look, will you cut it out? I'm going to start getting annoyed in a minute if you keep on at this. Will you please forget it? All right, this probably won't be much use to us, he said, fingering through the pages of brighter French. I mean, I think it's a little advanced. Oh, that, yes, I guess it's sort of a supercilious little book. I just grabbed it in a hurry. That's another thing I should have left for you to do. You're always much better at things like that than I am. Okay. Oh, it was the night after that when she told him, looking remorseful, that she had some bad news. I mean, not really bad, but annoying. First of all, Mrs. Gibbons called up today and issued this very formal invitation to dinner tomorrow night, and naturally, I said no. I said we couldn't get a babysitter. Then she started trying to pin me down for a night week, and I kept begging off until I realized we are going to have to see her soon anyway about putting the house on the market. So I said, why didn't they come here for dinner? Oh, Jesus. No, don't worry, you're not coming. You know how she is. She kept babbling about not wanting to put us to any trouble. Lord, what a pain that woman can be. And I kept insisting we did want to see her anyway on business. And this went on for half an hour until I finally walked her around to saying she'll come over alone tomorrow night. So it will be after dinner, strictly business, and with any kind of luck, we'll never have to see her again except to sell the house. Fine. Yes, but here's the trouble. I had completely forgotten we were supposed to be going to the Campbells tomorrow night, so I called Millie and tried using the same lie about the babysitter, and she seemed, I don't know, really upset. You know how Millie is sometimes? It's like dealing with a child, and the first thing I knew, she had me saying yes, we'll come tonight instead. So there goes the weekend. Campbell's tonight, Gillies tomorrow. I'm awfully sorry, Frank. Hell, that's alright. Is that all you meant by bad news? You're sure you don't mind? He didn't mind at all. In fact, he realized as he washed up and changed his shirt, he was looking forward with eagerness to telling the Campbells of the plan. A thing like this never really seemed real until you told somebody about it. Listen though, April, he said, stuffing in his shirt tail. When we're breaking it to Mrs. Gibbons, there isn't any reason why we have to tell her what we're going to do in Europe, is there? I mean, she thinks I'm enough of a creep as it is. Of course not. She looked surprised at the very idea of telling Mrs. Gibbons anything at all beyond the simple fact of their wish to sell the house. What possible business is it of hers? There's no need to tell the Campbells either, for that matter. Oh no, he said quickly. We have to tell them. And he almost said they are our friends before he cut himself. I mean, you know, of course, we don't have to, but why not? Hey, I'm done. Wow. You know, when I was going through, I was trying to estimate how much pages were in this chapter. I was like so scared of getting through them, but somehow I passed through the pages in a breeze. I guess it was because of that stimulating sort of montage of April and Frank being caught up in the joy of making plans that are not yet real or set in stone. Well, it's kind of set in stone in their heads, but like knowing Frank, I have no, I wouldn't place any bets on Frank. I feel like Frank would be a complete failure and a disaster, you know, with this move, if he even allows the move to happen. And then like how April was able to galvanize herself into action, you know, to go make solid plans, you know, for the move. Like, okay, you mean Frank is just going to work every day and he's like angry that she went to make the plans for the move? Like, who was going to do it? He spent all his day at work, or he spent all his day at work now dreaming and pretending nobody exists around him. Okay, so like how was the plan going to happen if April had not like moved into action? And then she apologized for it. It's like she knows her husband very well. She knows the kind of clown he is, and she just, it's like it feels like she's humoring him. But when she was narrating like the whole montage of going to make plans, get passports, you know, get steamships and airplane schedules and all of that, and even buying a French textbook, I feel like this idea to move to Paris is very much something coming from the inside of April. Obviously she suggested the plan, but like I was thinking she suggested the plan to like maybe like butter up her husband, you know, and favor him and stroke his ego as usual. But no, she actually wants to leave the country. Like she hates the place they live. She hates the mundaneness she doesn't appreciate the mediocrity of it all, like she's sick and tired, and I think she feels like she can get a new lease on life. Like basically, when Frank talks about April, he talks about her as if she's a zombie with no ambition, just there to make him feel good, but the more I know about April, the more I hear about her thought process, I feel like she's also very ambitious in a very different way from Frank, in that she's somebody that she could definitely like make her dreams come true by herself, and I don't know what those dreams are, but I feel like she wants to have independence. She doesn't want to be so dependent on her husband, or his view of her life. I think she wants to get out there and just make a name for herself, create an identity for herself, which was what the play kind of presented to her as an opportunity. But then the play banged, and I guess she felt disappointed. But like I admire April so much, because it's like, it just because something bangs here, it doesn't mean that's the end of it, right? Like you can always keep at it, just something banging, it might turn into something else, like banging does not mean the end of the world. Like it could just, maybe just the pieces could form into something you never expected or thought it was. And that's the beauty of this whole idea of moving to Europe. Like I'm actually excited for April. I really hope they make it. But knowing Frank and knowing how April caters to him and his ego, I feel like he might end up wrecking her in a way, because he's a husband, he's a partner. And when you're in a connection, a partnership like this, the actions of the other person goes a long way in affecting you, affecting you, destroying your plans. But April is actually funny, because the children's perspective of all of this madness is interesting to me, because to them it's like, okay, their parents are no longer paying them any attention, they're all caught up in their own world, and it's like, okay, if you don't pay us attention, well, what can we do now? It's not like the other time when you were paying us attention, there was any peace of mind for us, So now that you're not even paying us attention, and we can sleep through the night without, having you guys disrupt our sleep with fighting and non-stop fighting. And I didn't even know how bad it was until the kids' like perspective was brought into narration. Like you can see how very explosive, and if you think about it, maybe this is why you can see how explosive the marriage is, how their relationship is, in general. But like now I feel like this is just maybe a last ditch effort for them to, for April, I feel like this is a last ditch effort to kind of bring meaning into our marriage. I feel like she thinks, if something works out for Frank, if something new happens, something amazing, life-changing happens, then they're married, like they'll fall in love with each other, and the thing will be like new as it was before. But it's like, well, the children, I'm happy for them that they have peace of mind to sleep nowadays, you get. And then this is what other people do, like when their relationship is falling apart, they'll be like, oh, let's have a baby, let's have a child and keep this relationship going. Like it usually ends in a disaster. This one they already have two, and the first one they didn't even want it. The second one was just like to make the bluff keep going on, you get. So it's like kids is out of the question. So what can you do? What, a life change, a life move, all of those things, you get. And the way Frank keeps talking about going to tell Frank says he wants to tell the Campbells, he wants to tell the Campbells because he wants to rub it in their face. He wants to throw it at them, like, see, we are better than you, we're not on your level, and he wants to still maintain the guise of friendship. Like, I don't know, it's funny to me, Sha. And the way they are going to tell, maybe somehow, I know somehow Miss Gibbons will know, somehow somebody will blab, either Frank is the one that's going to blab, and then when the plan tanks and blows up in their face, now like we'll have to deal with the repercussions, the horrors of regret or something. But I've not read the book, so I'm looking forward to next week with another installment of the next chapter. So that much about today's reading. I'd love to hear it in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye. Bye. Why am I always holding things upside down? Oh my god.